And she asked me how I'd got into marketing communications. And this is a true story that my special subject in my degree was politics, heresy and propaganda under Philip II of France.
Wow. I love that this is, I didn't expect this. So here we are again with another unedited conversation with me, Ed Gould. And today's conversation, I've just been listening to it back to make sure I get this right, was with an amazing woman, Collette Lux, who is a specialist really in helping not-for-profits and education and skills sector really wrangle the challenge of brand and in marketing. So this is a perfect conversation if you are interested in how to develop brands and marketing strategies in complex environments. And by complex environments, I'll paint a picture for you briefly. Imagine massive marketing teams, but on top of that, huge boards, huge governors, sets of governors, loads of people involved in decision making within these organizations. So if that sounds like one of the challenges you've got, Collette has got some great advice for you. But it's not just about that. Collette also talks about her time at the BBC, where she was partly responsible for that amazing Perfect Day, Lou Reed Perfect Day trail, which is, I think, if you're over the age of 30, you've got to remember that. It was brilliant. And she also talks about a number of other points in her career where she learned lessons that she passes on to you. So if you're a marketeer, a creative, or anyone working within the space of not-for-profit, education, or skills, this is a brilliant conversation. But it's also a brilliant conversation if you're interested in how you can use traditional marketing techniques, pure marketing, to really help move businesses forward and build brands. So that's today's conversation. But I must also point out, we've been running a few of these now, and I just want to thank everyone for the feedback they've been giving us. And I want to enthuse you to get in touch with the Unedited show if you've got someone that you think we should talk to, or if you want to feature on the Unedited podcast, please get in touch, because we're keen to speak to all types of marketeers, creators and technologists that help businesses move forward. So if it sounds like you and you've got something to share, get in touch. I think that's about it for the pre-ramble. So if we're ready, let's sit back, get comfy, and get ready for another unedited conversation. So usually what I like to do at the start of every single conversation is get you to introduce yourself. So Collette, tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you've been up to and where you've come from.
Okay, thanks. Well, it's great to be here, and thank you so much for the opportunity to talk a bit more about my favourite subjects. So I'm Collette Lux. I'm Chief Commercial Officer at VTCT, but this is really the latest chapter in a career of 20 years in education. So I spent 10 years in higher education, really focused on student recruitment, branding, marketing, and latterly media and crisis management. And prior to that, worked between government and industry in one of the sector skills councils. So again, looking at marketing in a different context. Before that, the BBC, which was my first dip into not-for-profits. And prior to that, I did 10 years in Unilever. So I'm afraid, Ed, I'm going to be one of those boring people that says, and everything I know was learned from my first 10 years in Unilever. But what I've loved is taking those pure commercial lessons and just experimenting with them in a different context.
And this is the thing I'm really excited about getting into, is this idea of how do we take, it's what I do all the time, how do I take an idea from one space and bring it into another? And that skills and education sector, I mean, before we get into the meat and our talking points on this, I mean, it's undergoing huge challenges right now as we record this in terms of You've got a higher education market in the UK that's got huge pressures on it.
Yeah.
But that in itself is creating all sorts of opportunities for innovation, I think, and creativity about offering more choice to learners and a different type of choice. How are you reading the market? And I've sprung this on you slightly, but how are you reading that sort of skills and education market at the moment as someone who's been on the inside?
Been on the inside, yes. Well, it's very interesting because I think a lot of people, let's take it in two sections. There's the UK part and there's the international part. And the UK part, I think people are a little bit frozen, waiting to see what the government's going to come out with. And we were talking about it just in the office before I came here. There are going to be some announcements next week. Everyone's waiting for the budget. very clear from the signalling we're getting from the government there isn't tons of money around. And I think that does send shockwaves through the industry. People are thinking, well, hang on, we need to get closer to other sources of funding. So within the UK and within training, then we need to look at private sources. That means getting closer to employers. And even if we're not for profits, we're going to be working more closely with people who are for profit. So how do you reposition there? And then, of course, there's the whole international piece, which at VTCT is emerging as an issue, but obviously in higher education has been huge and massive geopolitical changes there, which I think for many people working in higher education are going to put them under the microscope, much more pressure than they've probably ever had to be before. So to come back to where we came in is you really do need the rigor you get from commercial marketing to help people cut through. And you use the word choice, and it really is all about choice in the end. We have got to get people to make great choices. And, one of the things I love about working in education is we're selling people good choices. We're selling them opportunity, a way to get ahead. But I think, nonetheless, those hard commercial skills can definitely help.
I mean, we recently became acquainted through some projects that we're working on, but our paths haven't crossed over the years, although I've dotted in and out of that sector as well. And what's been it's so driven by the politics, certainly on a local.
You mean within the
further and higher and tertiary and in the knowledge
the
bases or the whole thing all the way through. And it's such a challenge when a lot of people in the commercial sector are just looking for the right output and they want to hire people.
Yeah.
So you've got this commercial sector crying out for great people. And it's just connecting the dots. And what's exciting about what you guys doing at VTCT is you're trying to redefine really what that standard looks like and think about that in a different way. It might be worth just contextualizing what VTCT is compared to any other sort of provider.
Yeah, provider in the whole education space. So we're an awarding body. So we are like EdXL, AQA, City and Guilds, except we're exclusively in the vocational and technical skills space. So we are in a number of different sectors. They're all in the foundation area. So really looking at the equivalent of GCSEs and A-levels, not up to degree level. 1 or 2 qualifications go further, but it really is in that space of getting people into meaningful employment, something that's going to give them an opportunity for life. Many of our professions, you can have your own business, you can travel with it, and you will always be able to earn a living. And that is what's very exciting about it.
And that's attractive for people at the moment. Parents, young people, returners to work, people reskilling. Okay, so we've got the context. We've got in the Black Box studio today someone who has huge amount of experience through that education and skills sector, and also comes out of, Unilever's got a huge reputation for being a marketing engine, and there's the Unilever way.
Absolutely.
So great stuff. But one of the first things I wanted to touch on really is this idea of in those spaces, education, training, research, it's a risk-averse sector. It's driven by lots I will put this out there and you challenge it, how you feel. It's a sector where, on the whole, not for profits, and it exists not to derive commercial gain. So you spoke a bit about bringing that commercial sense across.
Yeah.
One of the things that reading up on you and having a look on what you've been doing in the past, there was an example that stood out from UCL where you really reframed why it should exist, which is at the center of what I love doing in marketing.
Yeah, about kind of the core essence. So I think the difference, and I thought you were going to say, so the difference between the commercial world and, say, universities, and the thing that always perplexed me is you come from the commercial world where you've got profit, how much you're going to make. That is the clarion call. That brings everyone together.
It's clear.
Yeah, totally.
Make me money or go away.
and the meetings don't ramble on because it's either going to work or it's not, or you believe it's going to and you want to come back and prove it. And as soon as I left Unilever and went to the BBC, I immediately understood why things get lost and why those employers are frustrated, saying, but we've been saying these are our needs for ages. How complicated can you make it? And one time when I was at eSkills, the Skills Council for Technology, I remember having the learning and development bosses from the top tech companies, Apple, Microsoft, in the room with some people from higher education. And one was talking in weeks to bring something to market, and the other one was talking in years, and trying to square that. So
I think our listeners could work out which way round that was.
Yeah, I'm sure they can. So it is that different space. But and the thing that was confusing at UCL and also at King's is you'd be working with academics who were so bold and courageous to pursue alternate lines of inquiry when it came to their research, and so unbelievably cautious when it came to managing the university. So it was in that context, when I was working at UCL, we really, within the London elite, we would go out doing student recruitment together with Imperial, King's, LSE. It was colloquially known as the Gang of Four because we'd tip up all over the world. And if you were serious about going to a top university,
you'd go as a unit.
So that you knew if you tipped up in Bangalore or Beijing, you could literally say to the top schools there, we're coming one night only. If you want to know what it's like to study in an elite university in London, come, and you can have 4 for 1. But of course, what that did is in your 3 slides or 10 minutes per institution, you had to define exactly what you stood for versus everyone else. And I tipped up to a few of these and heard the poor recruitment officers trying to rattle through, and we won a Nobel Prize in 1968, and we do this
and
and
our
do this.
Alumni include.
Yes, and there was a nasty standoff between 2 institutions about, in one global rankings, one was higher than the other, and I thought, this is just irrelevant. Look at the faces of the people in the audience. They are bored. You're rambling so fast they can't take any of it in. So I said, we need a complete change in approach. We've actually got to think and listen and stand in the shoes of our audience. What do they want to know? What's on their mind? What are they worrying about? Certainly in that context, it's a lot of money they're talking about sending their kids to London for an undergraduate degree. It's got to really be worth it, and it's got to make sense. And that really was the springboard into a whole piece of work I did at UCL to define what we would call in commercial terms brand essence. And we listened, talked to a number of people, different groups, staff groups, alumni, current students, prospective students, careers advisors. What makes UCL
just
special?
Marketing 101, just get to grips with why anyone cares.
They were pretty excited about it. It was great. I could just turn up and say, hey, I've got this idea. Here's one I've prepared earlier. We then worked with a great agency to help us define what the core mission was, what we stood for versus Oxbridge, versus Ivy League, the rest of London. And they came up with this proposition, the home of brave thinking. And I thought, yeah, that's a really good starting point. That's what we stand for. It connects to our founding myths. It makes sense. But of course, the academics hated it. And they said, I'm brave, I'm not doing this. Home, that's not what I believe in. So we went back to the agency and said, right, we love the idea, but now you've got to flip it into a proposition that we can use, into a tagline. Is a proposition, turn it into a tagline. And I have to say, I'm going to claim this one. I was on a train somewhere in Europe and we were having this whole big row because we had to sort it out before they were putting awnings up around one of the campuses we were building in East London. I said, why don't we just say disruptive thinking since 1826? And they went, that's it. And that became the tagline.
The agency loved you because they were scratching their heads. They were scratching their heads trying to fill a gap.
But the end of the story is that I knew it had worked when I went to one of these academic talks and someone was being interviewed, and one of the academics said, yeah, the thing is, I'm a disruptive thinker. And I thought, if they're saying it and they believe it and they feel good about it, we've nailed it. So,
it's such a challenge, though, when as a creative director, every day you're trying to get people to believe in what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I do notice the difference when I'm working within a university versus a commercial. But it's not just that; it's even within that sector. There's differences between different levels of it, and it all depends on the team and how that's been put together. But I can remember developing for the University of Southampton their 60th anniversary piece, and we did this a very simple idea, 60 at 60, where 60 world-changing innovations that the cure for ovarian cancer is being worked on within a couple of miles from where we're sat right now. The Mars rover was developed, and all of these things. And the most transformational part of that campaign is none of the academics knew what the other academics were doing.
Oh,
and so
goodness.
The biggest shift really within there was them going, this is amazing. I'm working at a university where Mars rover, because they're so entrenched in their, understandably, they are committed fully, but the academics are such an important part of the product.
Yeah.
And universities are wrestling with this idea of how do I expedite that value beyond the lecture? And that, that is shaped in things like research and innovation, but it's also to do with that marketing piece, which is really, really hard. So when you saw something like that and they're going, wow, well done, Bob, down there, it actually gets people talking. And I think that a big part of that was to win the trust of them to say, how do you get, so I want to ask you, as someone that's had to do this in some huge organizations, how do you start to win the trust? I need some tips because it'll get my ideas through more often.
Well, it's true. So that doesn't surprise me. And I'm going to do the Unilever thing. Even in a brilliant company like Unilever, they always said, if only Unilever knew what Unilever knew. And I often say that to people saying, it is hard here, but even the best, it's constant work in progress. It's constant struggle to find an efficient way to let people have a sense of pride in the institution, because that's what you're talking about with Southampton, is once they know about the brilliant work one of their colleagues is doing, they feel great about it.
And we pass it on.
And we had that in UCL as well. That, it's so enormous, people couldn't possibly know everything that was happening. And actually, in my other role at the BBC, when we did Perfect Day, that sense of pride that we could bring things together, that's what softened the boundaries. So in terms of tips and help for you, Ed, what I would say is you've got to be good, brilliant at what you do, committed to it, and bring a higher level or a purer level of marketing thinking, because they're bright people and they want to know there's a bit of substance behind what you do. I mean, one of my first exchanges with one of the most challenging deans at UCL, and she history happened to be in her faculty, and she asked me how I'd got into marketing communications. And this is a true story, that my special subject in my degree was politics, heresy and propaganda under Philip II of France.
Wow.
In 1294
How many
to
marketeers?
1314.
Okay, if you're listening and you've got a better degree than that and you're now in marketing, let me know. Wow.
But it was very interesting because internal comms, to a large extent, I think I drew more on my understanding about how to manage the medieval court to some extent.
I love that. I didn't expect this.
Really?
I love this as a big historian
yourself.
Yeah. So the machinations of the court and the politics of the court
was definitely helpful. But the point was, with this individual who was very anti-professional services, anti-marketing, she suddenly looked at me and thought, oh, there's a bit of intellectual rigour behind what you're saying. You haven't just drifted into this. You're fascinated with how to influence people. And in universities, therefore, the kind of principles of marketing in the commercial world you'd use with your end user, you have to use it internally. You have to see those very influential academics, and let's be honest, that many of them are very influential to their peer group. You need to effectively communicate and market to them as you would to the professional world. So that is making the connection. In a university context, you've got to have some academic rigour behind what you're saying, evidence where you've got it, or admit you haven't. And when they've got a decent point, say, that's interesting, hadn't thought about that, I'll move on, rather than no, I'm right, I'm not listening. They will have no respect for that. So you've got to win the respect internally, and you've got to have decent ideas. So I do think...
Did you feel you had to elevate the value of marketing in the conversation in that context? Or do you think the establishments you've been in understood the function and the value of marketing and what it brings? Or did you feel ever that you were having to lift that?
The whole time.
Welcome to my life.
Well, and, when I sometimes see colleagues from Unilever who've taken a different route through their career in the commercial world, and I think, oh, yes, no one I've worked with since the BBC onwards really understood what it was to get into Unilever and be a marketeer there. They just say, oh, well, you've got a bit of commercial experience. But what I could do is then I could not say, and marketing's great, but just give them a different paradigm to think through a problem. And they think, oh, okay. And occasionally an interesting article, you say, well, look, this is another example that explains it. So you're kind of entering into it and saying there's more to this than you think there is. And then you start to win their respect. I think
that's, we have to use, with my agency hat on, we might get a tiny piece of your time each month if we're lucky, yet you're asking us to solve some of your biggest challenge, or certainly some of the challenges you have. So trying to make sure that the first time you think about that isn't the time when we're face to face. And that's sending an article, maybe like keeping in contact on that. But that other point about elevating that issue is, I talk to the guys here about it as well, is they say, I don't want to be an order taker. I don't want to just be told what to do. Then elevate your own knowledge and understanding. You should know, you should have a good, you don't have to know everything, but you should really understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You should understand why it matters, and they should see that you care about that more than they cared about that challenge, and that might make them actually give you a bit more time and ask you your opinion rather than tell you what to do.
Exactly. They need to have enough confidence in thinking about the marketing frameworks and skills to have that conversation and to be able to flex with it, so that in conversation you're giving us different ideas and angles that we can use to sell on internally. But the other point to that, I would say, I think there are many people client side in the not-for-profit world who don't know how to work with agencies, who think it's about giving you an instruction as to how to solve the problem.
It's not just not-for-profit side.
Well, and I
everywhere.
think, again, that is something where I'm always pulling people back, sort of grabbing on the reins, just saying, no. You're saying this communication or this proposition does this, but it's not solving that. Don't tell them how you think it could be solved. You've got to give them the space and understanding of how far you're prepared to go, but not solve the whole thing, because otherwise you're not letting the agency prove the added value.
But I think, your example, that UCL example, is a really good one, in the sense that often the answer isn't developed by one side or the other.
No.
It really isn't. Like some of my best work was not my best work. It is a team effort, and you sort of, who knows where it came from, but you're trying to create in any environment a marketing function, whether that includes externals, internals, that allows those ideas to come to the top.
Yes. And of course, the earlier part of that story was with this agency I'd worked with for a couple of years. They were, we'd had a lot of tussle to and fro, but a lot of trust and respect. And they're a brilliant design agency, and they wanted to do the advertising campaign for us. And the first idea they came back with, it was a design agency with a tagline. And I had written a long letter to my team just saying, email to the team saying, look, I told you we shouldn't have used a design agency for this. What I want is an image, a headline that sets up a challenge that resolves itself in the brand, ramble, sent it and realised I'd sent it to the agency. So I then called up the agency. I said, listen, I am really sorry. And she said, do you know what?
And now I know what you want.
Yeah. Thank you for not sugarcoating it. Now I know what you want. And that's when they came back with the Stripes campaign. It was the award-winning campaign. So
I think that it's the nub. We add so much complexity to relationships. to be or by I think there's also an element of not being open. So it's like, just tell them enough. But actually, the more that we understand from each other in these words, and this isn't agency, this is relationships at home, this is marriages,
we're going to solve everything here today.
We'll solve everything here today. But it all comes back to what we're meant to be good at, which is communication.
Yeah.
And often people within the functions that we're working in focus more on the sort of the tactics than the actual root part of that. Was how am I going to engage with those deans or those faculty leads or those people who, although they're not in the marketing function, could basically mean that my work doesn't go ahead because they put one word in the ear of the dean and suddenly it's over. So hearts and minds and bringing people on it's such a valuable thing to understand, whether you're in any organisation.
I was going to ask you a question around working with clients. Sorry, slight stepping out of role here. I think I'm quite direct, and if something isn't working or something wrong, I'll say it. But very often I pick up problems where people have been embarrassed to say no. So maybe we'll come back to that later, or we need to think about it a bit more. I'm like, why are you saying that? It's a no, but you still want to work with them and you want them to do something else.
I mean, from our point, so there's a conversation that agencies won't tell you about, which is how do we train the client?
Oh,
how do we train the client? And over the years, we've touched on it lots of different times. And the reason that comes up in agency world, and some of our listeners who are consultants or agencies might recognize this, is you can win or lose or go bust waiting for an answer. That's the reality. So real talk is important. Collecting the right brief and that being a collaborative process is key. And I'm going to tell you the promised land. I can't even tell you that. I can't swear that this happens every time at all. And we've put templates in place, processes in place. We try and onboard clients, but you onboard one person, and actually what happens is someone else, and this isn't just you, it isn't specific to anyone. Often then other people come in. We had something this week with a big government organization, and the person that had picked up the project wasn't in the last 8 meetings. And suddenly they're asking for things that you're thinking, and it took a while.
Would have been good to know.
So we've started using really transparent things like AI note takers, video in call, but still, well, I'm the client, I'm going to watch all of that. So you have to do all of the stuff that you talked about with your dean, we should be doing with a client.
Every time it's a new client.
And really and all the way through. And so some of our customers and client partners here we've been working with for 15 years. It's not the same person. They've all moved, they've all gone. And so you have to reinvest in that relationship. And when we don't, agencies tend to lose the work. And when you do, you tend to keep it. But the sort of tips is for a client wanting to get more out of their agency. Actually, the team here at Carswell Gould, they published a bunch of stuff of what we need from our client on our website.
So read the website.
Read the website, but optimizing that, it is about communication. It is about everyone on the team, your team on client side, brand side, understanding that we don't work for you, we work for the brand, and we're all in it together. And if the more I know, the better chance I've got of solving it. So common problems include not telling us a budget. I'm not going to tell you the budget, you'll spend it. Of course I'll spend it. It's the budget. Or not wanting to be honest because they're worried about hurting someone's feelings.
Yeah, that's the one I see a lot.
So it's the same. It's the same, really there's this idea that there's agency and brand, one side on the other. There's not. There's marketeers, creatives, technologists. How do we come together to make better work?
Yes.
And I'm still desperately trying to work on that and talking to people like you as part of it. Okay.
That's great pleasure. Right, take the interview back.
Let's grab control back from Collette here, listeners, because she's going to put me under the microscope, and that is not the idea. So I think that segues perfectly into one of the challenges in the sorts of spaces you've been talking about is creating cut through. And you mentioned something a minute ago that anyone who's of my age or more or around my age will remember, which was that BBC trailer, or you tell us what it is, The Perfect Day, which was for children in need. But I'm interested in, we're in a world now where there's so many channels, so many systems, so many suppliers, so many things. How can we use traditional thinking or pure marketing thinking to get back to the nub of how do I create a great creative idea? And does that Perfect Day demonstrate that?
Yeah, that's a great example. And it builds on what we were saying about the university world, because program makers are as tricky. And it did come out of a pure piece of brand thinking at the time. The issue then is actually the issue I heard Tim Davie talking about this morning on the Today programme, which is how does the BBC justify the licence fee?
Why does the BBC
we could sugarcoat it any which way, but that's what it comes down to. What makes the BBC so special in a crowded, ever-fragmented marketplace? And so we did the same kind of detailed brand thinking. At the time, it was very much against Sky, and we could see what was going to come with cables and the whole multi-channel self-scheduling world that at the time felt out of reach, but of course is completely normal now. And there was about the scale, the breadth and depth, and the fact that the BBC had this purpose, inform, educate and entertain, that was written through everyone's heart. You could cut a BBC person open, and that is fundamentally what they believe in. They might be in a different order. They might want to entertain, inform and educate, but it was fundamentally there. And that became the proposition, which was only the BBC could do this because of the unit where it was funded. It could bring together fantastic, talented artists and that's where Perfect Day came from. So the script was originally for a different track. Oasis said no, they wouldn't let us use it for free. So
Cancel those tickets, everybody.
So they went to Lou Reed, who said, yeah, absolutely. And by the way, my mate David Bowie's up for it as well. So immediately production had those two artists, and then they just went out asking lots of different people to sing a different line. Of course, there was an intellectual, rigorous framework behind it. So if you very carefully analysed the trail, you would see that there were different genres of music that were proportionate at the time to the market share. Because otherwise... you had
really? To the market share?
So you had to have some justification. Otherwise, you would have as much Radio 3 as you had Radio 2 as Radio 1. So there was all these other layers in there behind it, but we still managed to sew together something fantastic. Where it differed to how I'd worked in the commercial world is in a Unilever, you spent 70% of your time discussing the strategy and the brief and 30% doing production. There, we saw the idea, thought it was amazing. As soon as David Bowers said yes, we spent 90% doing production. And it got under the radar of programme makers. And so for the team I was in there, which was in the centre of the BBC, suddenly people thought, oh, those brand marketing people, I mean, they're all right. I don't like the rest of professional services,
but they're adding value.
Okay.
They're adding
value, helped them think, yeah, I'm proud of the BBC. This is what we can do. And and then we released it as a single, and it raised £1 million for children in need. But for me personally, the most exciting part of it was on a Monday morning, I got on the train, the Northern Line, to go into the BBC. The day after we'd shown the trail, because it was 3 minutes, it had to be put in the schedule. This sounds like details, but if we did shorter trails, so some of those ads for programmes you see between other programmes, the production people just put them in. But because this was 3 minutes, we knew it was going to be on Sunday night at 9 o'clock, I think it was. So there I was on my train on a Monday morning, reading my newspaper, and I heard two girls behind me saying, oh, did you see that ad for the BBC last night? I was thinking, it's not an ad, it's a trail. And then I listened to what they were saying, and they just said, only the BBC could do that because of how it's funded. And they literally spoke back our desired consumer takeout. So, all those marketing things where you get your proposition, your desired consumer takeout. And I was sitting there thinking, I wish this was being filmed. This is just unbelievable.
And it does work.
And
marketing
it
does
really
work.
does work. As I say, it's wonderful when you do actually see it happen that clearly. And of course, then everyone started talking about it. Then the people who'd been very cynical about, oh, we'll put it in the schedule for 9 o'clock were like, actually, this is quite good. We'll put it in a little bit more. So you then got into a positive cycle, and it made people feel great about the BBC. And in our terms, it made us feel great about the department. So then we could push through the single logo brand, the Gill Sands logo we did after that.
And people went with it, and they had faith.
They suddenly had faith in us.
And I think
change.
That's when you see, and what I'd say about that is a storytelling brand. Even though it's a trail, that's a very traditional approach to saying, how do we bring to life the special source of the BBC? But you do it right, and suddenly those conversations about funding are a lot easier. And
they are.
And that makes a big, because they're now in those, they need another perfect day, I think, at the moment.
But I think your point about fragmentation of media is also interesting, because people talk about the coffee cooler moment has gone in the production world. You never have that uniting the nation moment. People would just be off in their little TikTok watching different things. But I challenge that and say, if there's, a football match, or if there's a fantastic bit of primetime drama that you can get, was it 6 million? We're watching the Death in Paradise Christmas special, or...
God, I can't think why.
I can't remember what the other was, but there are a couple of bits of drama. Oh, the Post Office, Mr. Bates versus the Post Office.
Yes, that scandal
There was up to... it wasn't over 10 million, so it was not like the old days where you could have 10, 20 million audiences, but a significant number of people were saying, actually, I want to watch that, and I'll talk about it the next day. And I think that speaks to, if it's good enough, if it's really great, whether it is drama or the drama of sport or something people can't miss, then it's the creativity that still cuts through. And I think then brings people together thinking, I want to see that.
I think there's certainly still those moments, for sure. But, I mean, I would say there's also micro moments now that you didn't have before. Like, you talk about the... the stuff that I'm looking over into the darkness in the studio at Louis, but the
To
stuff
a young person.
to a younger, a younger,
Sorry.
yeah, young person. There's things we share here now through Teams and probably offices all over the place, and they start as a meme, and actually that's where they and you get them on WhatsApp, and they're micro moments, but they still have a level of creativity to them.
Definitely.
Which, when you pull away all of the complexities of, well, it's our social strategy, or it's this, it's just marketing. It's just saying, how do we create a moment in time that really stands out and is magical? And usually that comes from getting as close to the customer as possible and thinking, what would they really care about? And how can I frame this in an interesting way?
And how can it's about understanding their needs are to make them think something. So the old adage is, if I want you to think I'm funny, I don't tell you I'm funny. I tell you a joke, and then the takeout is you think I'm funny. So people don't do that. And, we can talk about AI and, I think that will soak up a lot of the mechanics of marketing, how you get it out there and so on. But certainly how I feel now, it won't be a substitute for that fresh creative approach and something that would change the way people see things.
That's why the thinking, I think it's a really great time, because I would say for the last 10 years of my career, I've constantly come up against, and there's a place for everyone in this world, but there's certainly more different people vying for the marketing pound and different organizations, and there's a lot of complexity out there. So if I was a CMO or a marketing leader, understanding who to trust, how to trust it, what to pull in, what not to do, it's got increasingly more difficult. And as an integrated practitioner, I always think, God, that must be so hard. And we're now with my agency hat on, we pull all those different people in and form these teams. But the thing that sits at the center of that is still traditional, pure play, integrated marketing thinking. And marketing, not even marketing communications, marketing. And I'm not even sure everyone in our industry knows the difference between marketing and marketing communications anymore. And the value of really getting to grips with that price proposition, like what you really boil down to, then AI can be transformational in cutting your costs, reducing speed to market. Great.
I agree.
But you need that thinking. Let's move on, if I may, to a subject we sort of touched on a little bit, and it's about how we can really affect more positive change in these complex organizations. So you've mentioned Unilever, which is a monster organization, the BBC, which is a big
my memoir will be working inside the Great British Institution.
Turning oil tankers by Collette
Yes,
Lux.
something like that.
How do you even begin in trying to shape that marketing function? Because there'll be people listening that have just got a job they've just got their new, and let's all start from the premise we don't really know what we're doing, do we, when we get those new jobs? You sit in there and you think, how do I build this function in a way that's actually going to work well? So how do we build the right functions? What sort of key steps are there to establish those right teams so you can deliver the brief? What's your take on that?
So it was quite a shock when I first went into higher education. Just the size of the teams were much bigger than outside. And you're absolutely right. You've got to get to grips with it, I think, quite quickly. And I did a lot of change at King's and at UCL. And the advice I was given is don't wait too long. Get on with it while you're still fresh and you can still think what's right.
Before you get bogged down
in the politics and the people. And you've got to know your North Star.
This is a thing I don't ever have to deal with. Although I see it. I can see when you can sit the first few meetings there, eager.
Yes, and they want to
and
create
a few months
change.
later you go back in and they're like, oh my God.
I know I can't do this, I can't do that. I mean, when I was at King's, there'd been quite a lot of churn before in the leadership before I came. And my first 4 months, 70% of the department left.
Wow.
They just had been looking for jobs. It came together. They kept saying, it's not you, but. And I was thinking, well, it might be me a little bit, but whatever. It happened more quickly than I was planning. And I remember the director of admissions coming to me and saying, the one thing you mustn't fail on this year is to get the prospectus out. Everything else can wait. And I was like, okay, do you know someone who can help? So we literally, in that circumstance...
You rebuilt from scratch.
Yeah, we rebuilt from scratch. At UCL, it was different because the teams had been in place much longer and they kind of wanted to stay and enjoyed being there. But in all those circumstances, if you're brought in as someone to create change, you've got to do it. And you've got to be clear with the leadership or whoever's hired you, that is the North Star. We need to deliver this change. We need to deliver these students, this income, whatever it is. And then I tend to break it down into thinking about the people, the processes, and the purpose, and interchanging those. So I keep talking about North Star.
Depending on the challenge or the...
Yeah, well, rather like that BBC thing, they may be in a different order. For myself, coming in the morning, going home at night, thinking this is really tough stuff and I know it's going to change a lot of people's lives. I've got to make this change. I think with the people, so knowing why you're doing it, that's the purpose. And with the people, I'll always go into change thinking maybe they don't understand. They haven't had the experience. They haven't got the knowledge. So let's do skills. Let's do support. Let's give them opportunity. If they still aren't able to make the change that you want, then you have to say, well, maybe it's will. Maybe they just don't want to. And then there's a whole host of other things. And then the other piece...
So there's some honesty there to say, they're not going to get there.
Yeah.
And then the necessity to act on that, which a lot of people just don't act on that. And in those sorts of institutions, the external observation from someone that has no right to say it is that there's a lot of people that can hide in big organisations. Yeah. Is your style really to try and not allow that to happen out of interest?
It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
More than once people have said there's nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
And that is why I'd always like to believe the best in people. Think if you've asked them to do something and it doesn't happen, well, maybe they didn't understand. Maybe I didn't spend enough time explaining. Maybe it wasn't clear enough. Maybe they use a different language. Maybe they need some training. And if you're still not getting the change there and you realise, actually,
it's them.
They did understand it, they just don't want to. And that is going to block you achieving what you're brought in to do, then you've got to take action.
What happens when that's up, not down? So what happens when you're brought into those spaces and actually you're trying to convince that leadership that the course of action is right? They've set you a task.
Yeah. They've
said you've got to achieve this, and you're going, okay, I can achieve it like this. But they're going, actually, I'd rather have a blue logo than it. And you're thinking, this has got nothing to do with...
Well, I think that is interesting. If they want that level of change, of course, if they want you to diversify student cohorts, get into new markets, you've got to be absolutely sure that is definitely what they want. And they have said to you, go and sort it out, rather than you start sorting out and you go back and they said, oh, I didn't realise it was going to create that sort of change. Oh, I'm not backing you. Absolutely. But to the point about getting involved in executional detail, what you will find, Ed, is I'll make sure with the agency we've got it to a point where strategically and executionally it's broadly right. And that last 10% that if they want to say, oh, it should be blue, not red, I'm not going to say, that's a great point. Yeah, okay, it should be blue, not red. But don't tell me it's the wrong proposition or it's the wrong imagery or it's the wrong media platform. Just accept, when you, particularly in education, but not for profits more broadly, I think often they want to add that added value. They've got a particular point of view or a particular
understanding. And if that helps them believe in it,
yeah,
why not?
Actually, to go
back...
What
if it breaks it?
Has that ever happened?
Yeah.
Oh, well, the only time that sort of happened was with the UCL campaign, where one of the very, very well-respected deans saw the Stripes campaign. So it was kind of what the world looked like before, and then UCL striped across afterwards. And that was the home of disruptive thinking. And he said to me, the thing is, it's too complicated. People just won't understand it. And I thought, well... too late. It's on 49 posters around UCL East.
Thanks for your input. But...
fortunately, I was sitting in a meeting checking my phone and they'd just put them up and the marketing officer was down there and she sent me a picture of a group of children and their teacher just standing around one of the posters discussing it. And it was just brilliant. It said within 30 minutes, there were a group of kids and their teacher standing around talking about, it was a kind of whole eco project. So after the meeting, I was like, oh, Alan, do you have a moment? No, I know you said it was very complicated, but it looks like a group of school kids could actually have this discussion. So there's always the danger of underestimating your audiences. So, but I was going to say the other one is where that sort of intervention actually added value. If you look at the Perfect Day film, there is a cut every so often where it goes back to the camera lens and someone intervening in the story. And that was from the controller of BBC One. We just had the BBC doing stuff at the beginning, a beautiful film, and then doing stuff at the end. And he said, no, you need to be reminded that the BBC is the one doing things as it goes through.
It's not just Live Aid.
Yes.
I guess that is actually quite a good intervention in that context.
And it was. And so I try and take that with me and think, actually, those kind of interventions right at the end can add value.
Is there something that someone's told you in the past, some advice that somebody's given you over the years that either plays to this or that you still bring to bear in your work now? And we've all got one, I think, that we pass on to someone else.
There's lucky people who get to hear them.
I always ask this question because usually there's some great bits of tips that we can get.
Well, my sister, my older sister, as I always like to say,
she'll be thrilled.
She doesn't love
She'll be thrilled you said that.
She gave me a piece of advice, which is the one I pass on to everyone. And she works in the world of telly. And she said to me many years ago, how did Jerry Hall remain a supermodel for so many decades? Because most of the supermodels, they come in, they go out, they're a flash in the pan. But somehow Jerry Hall has carried on. Now, obviously, there's fantastic bone structure, flawless skin. But the real secret is she was always nice to the photographer's assistants. And that means, in the world of fashion, most supermodels come in, the great I am, just talk to the photographer and say nothing or are really rude to the photographer's assistant. In the way that fashion photography goes is that photographer's assistant one day will be the photographer. And the first person they want to drop is that supermodel who was so rude to them. So in that context, I just say to people, it doesn't matter how senior you are, every single person is important. Treat them with respect, treat them well. They will bring values and it just might prolong your own career.
And I think that when we're thinking about the point before about how do you create the right culture within a marketing function, sitting on the supplier end of the conversation, there has been countless times where people have treated me or my guys and girls and men and women, and whichever descriptor you might wish to use.
Correct.
But without that level of respect, because they've been giving a little bit of authority and suddenly that goes to their head and off we go.
Yeah.
Very hard to pick back from there when you're being hard in. I've cocked up in the past where I think my idea is the most important thing in the room and someone who's lower down has not agreed, and I've met that person later.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah, they've become your client.
So I have learned from personal experience and cards on the table. Us creatives are like that, but you really notice it. There's also another example of, it's not exactly the same point, but when I was a young kid, I used to hold ropes at boat shows because this is I've been in the business since 16, 17 in school holidays and all the way through. And we used to do a lot with brands like Sunseeker and Fairline. And so I can remember being at a London boat show holding a red rope for Cranky Yachts, an Italian yacht brand. And I was just there as an extra. And this kid came up and said, can I look on the boat? And I really didn't care. I was like, yeah, go for it. Because I had no... I'm not a salesman. I'm just like, go for it. He looked at it, and the next day he came back with his family and bought it. And he told his dad had just passed away. Or a year or two ago. They were planning to buy one. He was probably about, I would say, 19, 20. And when I asked the sales guys why he did it, he said he went to another brand, and I did mention them earlier, and they didn't let him on because he was just deemed
too young, not significant. Oh.
So you never know who the most significant person in the ring is.
It is. And as you say, it creates the right culture.
So
totally.
This has been fascinating. We're coming towards the end. What's next for Collette? What are you doing at VTCT, and what's coming next, and what are you looking forward to in the future in terms of some of the challenges you've got on the work that you're doing?
Well, as you know, we are bringing. We've gone on the acquisition trail in the last few years, which is why we've extended from hair and beauty into early years, logistics. We're bringing everything together under one brand. So, it's a fantastic time to be a marketeer at VTCT. We're going to have a new brand, a new website. We've just introduced the CRM. And so we've got the engine working. So my list of transformational projects, we're almost through them all.
I mean, you're living what we've been talking about really at the moment. That's sort of getting this organisation to believe in this.
Marketing and to do it. And I have to say all credit to the senior team at VTCT. They brought me in to create change and have not backed down from any level of change that I've wanted to drive through.
And that's exciting.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's fantastic because very often people say, well, we want change. And then it's like, oh, well, we didn't mean that bit. So we are looking to expand, obviously within the UK in those new sectors, but we're also looking at partnerships in East Asia, in Africa, and possibly even the Caribbean. So exciting times ahead.
What's really exciting, if we go all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, I mentioned the word choice. And we've lost, I think it would go back to the 90s when the focus on university education became almost complete, and almost like a Thatcherite approach to education. And there's been a lot of change in the UK market, and it's become very dependent on overseas students. But, as a parent now, thinking about the future, knowing that there's organisations that are thinking in a creative and different way about how you can offer choice to vocational skills to make sure people have got jobs today and tomorrow, I think is great. So if you are listening and you are in the training and skills space, get in touch with Collette. I'm sure you'd be interested to talk.
Definitely.
There's interesting things going on. So all that it leaves for me to do is to thank you. It's been brilliant. Is there anything else you want to share before we pack up?
No, I think we've covered everything, and it's been great talking through and thinking about things in the past and making connections with how you think about problems as well.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And if you're listening to this and you think, I've got an idea for Collette, I'm sure she would welcome your contact, unless you're an agency, in which case, leave her alone. I'll be talking to her later. But thank you, Collette, and that's another unedited conversation wrapped up.
That's a wrap on another episode of UnEdited. Make sure to like, subscribe and turn on those notifications so you never miss an episode. Find all of our updates on your favourite social media and podcast platforms. Just search for the UnEdited podcast.